The year is 850 AD. The air inside a Tang Dynasty workshop is thick, not with the smell of incense, but with the sharp, acidic sting of sulfur and the earthy scent of charcoal. An alchemist, his hands stained dark by minerals, leans over a stone mortar. He is not a general, he is not a conqueror. He is a seeker of the elixir of immortality. He is searching for a way to extend the human spark forever. He carefully measures out saltpeter. He adds a pinch of sulfur. He blends in the charcoal. But as he works, a stray spark from a nearby hearth lands in the bowl. In a heartbeat, the room is gone. The explosion is a physical shock that ripples through the history of the world. The alchemist did not find the secret to eternal life. He accidentally stumbled upon the most efficient way to end it. He called it huo yao, fire medicine. But this medicine wouldn't heal the body. It would become the foundation of the first supreme machines in human history. For 500 years, China held a monopoly on the invisible power of the explosion. While the rest of the world was still perfecting the steel of the longsword, the engineers of the East were already transcending the limits of the human arm. They were moving warfare into the realm of pure chemistry and physics. They were building weapons that didn't just kill, they bypassed the enemy's ability to even comprehend the threat. Welcome to the Battle Codex. Today we decode the forgotten chronicles of China's secret weapons, the engineering marvels that laid the blueprints for modern rocketry, machine guns, and cruise missiles centuries before the world was ready for them. To understand the supreme machine of ancient China, we must look at the sea. Imagine a naval battle in the 14th century during the Ming Dynasty. An enemy fleet sits a mile offshore. To the sailors on those ships, that mile is an invisible wall. They are safe. No arrow can reach them. No catapult has the precision to strike a moving hull at this range. They believe the distance is their armor. But on the deck of the Chinese junk, a soldier isn't reaching for a bow. He is approaching a 5-foot-long wooden cylinder carved into the shape of a dragon. This is the Huolongchushui, the fire dragon out of water. It is a weapon of pure transcendence. It is the world's first multi-stage rocket. The soldier ignites the 4 booster rockets attached to the dragon's base. With a roar that sounds like the breath of a god, the dragon leaves the deck. It doesn't sail through the air like a clumsy stone. It screams across the surface of the water just a few feet above the waves. The shock to the enemy is not just physical, it is psychological. In the 1300s, a projectile that propels itself is a violation of the laws of nature. The enemy sailors watch as this wooden beast closes the invisible wall of a mile in mere seconds. But the true secret, the engineering masterpiece, is hidden inside the dragon's mouth. As the 4 exterior booster rockets reach the end of their fuel, the heat triggers a secondary fuse. This is the stage separation that we see in modern aerospace today. The empty boosters fall away, and the flame travels into the dragon's belly, igniting a swarm of smaller specialized fire arrows. Suddenly, the dragon breathes. A dozen independent rockets launch from its mouth, fanning out in a calculated grid of fire. They strike the enemy decks, piercing sails and igniting stores. The Huolongchushui was the 14th century ancestor of the modern cruise missile. It was a system designed to bypass human reaction. By the time the enemy captain saw the smoke on the horizon, the kill was already descending. It was a weapon of total distance, a machine that proved that if you can control the vacuum of space and the chemistry of the flame, the enemy has no escape. Why did this work? It wasn't just luck, it was a battle of mathematics and standardized logistics. The Ming engineers understood that for a multi-stage rocket to function, the fuel-to-oxygen ratio had to be perfect. If the boosters burned too fast, the dragon would tumble into the sea. If they burned too slow, the secondary fuse wouldn't ignite in time. The fire medicine inside these rockets was a high-nitrate variant of gunpowder, specifically designed for thrust rather than explosion. The wooden hull was coated in a lacquer to reduce aerodynamic drag, the same philosophy we see in the swept-wing designs of modern jet fighters. The Huolongchushui represented the shift from the warrior to the operator. The man firing the dragon didn't need the strength of a hero, He needed the precision of a technician. He had to understand the angle of the launch, the dampness of the air, and the timing of the fuse. He was the precursor to the modern missile technician, sitting in a command center miles away from the impact. This was the first time in history that a weapon possessed its own artificial intelligence, not in the form of a computer, but in the form of a timed multi-stage chemical sequence. It decided when to boost, when to separate, and when to strike. The invisible kill had been perfected, but as the fire dragons fell from the sky, a new system of death was being prepared on the mainland. A system that would turn the block of the battlefield into a wall of lead. While the fire dragon conquered the invisible wall of distance at sea, a different kind of terror was being perfected for the open plains and mountain passes of the mainland. If the rocket was the shock, the next weapon in the Battle Codex was the block. In the traditional choreography of ancient war, timing was everything. A cavalry charge was a rhythmic event, the thundering of hooves, the lowering of lances, the terrifying gap closing between two lines of men. To stop it, you needed disciplined archers, but a human archer has limits. He must breathe, he must aim, he must reach for a new arrow. In the heat of a charge, those seconds of reload time are the difference between a successful defense and being trampled into the dirt. The Ming engineers looked at this human limitation and decided to engineer it out of existence. They created the nest of bees, Yifa Liangqiang. To the approaching enemy, it looked like nothing more than a hexagonal wooden box, roughly the size of a small treasure chest, carried on the back of a single-foot soldier. But as the cavalry reached the 300-yard mark, the point of no return, the soldier didn't draw a sword. He set the box on a tripod and ignited a single master fuse. What followed was the birth of suppression fire. The nest of bees didn't fire one arrow. It unleashed a wall of 32 to 100 arrows in a single 3-second scream of wood and fire. Because the arrows were propelled by small gunpowder rockets attached to their shafts, they didn't follow the high looping arc of a traditional bow. They flew flat, they flew fast, and because they were fanned out in a calculated hexagonal grid, they saturated the air. This was the world's first machine gun. The block here wasn't a physical wall of stone, it was a wall of probability. If you were a knight charging into that zone, you weren't fighting a man, you were fighting a mathematical certainty. The nest of bees removed the need for the archer to be a hero. He didn't need to be the best shot in the army, he just needed to be the operator of the machine. The engineering secret of the nest of bees lay in the synchronized ignition. The interior of the box was a complex web of quick-burning fuses, all leading to a central ignition point. This ensured that every rocket fired within milliseconds of the others. But the Chinese didn't stop at just the launch. They understood that the kill is more effective when it scrambles the senses. The arrows were often dipped in toxins, aconite or arsenic, meaning that even a grazing wound from a rocket that had lost its kinetic energy was still a death sentence. Furthermore, the psychological shock of the sound was a weapon in itself. 100 rockets igniting at once sounds like a swarm of angry hornets, hence the name. It panicked horses, broke the formation of the infantry, and created a smokescreen that allowed the Chinese operators to vanish and reposition before the enemy could even see who had fired. This was the first time warfare moved away from the duel, the idea of one man aiming at another, and into the era of saturation. It is the direct ancestor of the modern MLRS, multiple launch rocket system, used by modern armies to delete entire coordinates on a map. The nest of bees proved that if you can control the volume of the sky, you don't need to be a better warrior, you just need to be a better mathematician. As these secret weapons began to dominate the battlefield, the very culture of the Chinese military began to shift. In previous eras, the hero was still the center of the story, the general who could lead from the front, the swordsman who could take on 10 men. But by the time of these Ming Dynasty Wunderwaffen, the technician was becoming the most valuable asset. The supreme machine required a different kind of soldier. You needed men who could read chemical formulas, You needed logisticians who could transport volatile gunpowder across thousands of miles of varied terrain without it exploding or becoming damp. You needed specialized fire units that functioned more like modern artillery batteries than traditional infantry. The invisible wall was now a reality of Chinese strategic thought. They realized that the best way to win a war was to ensure the enemy never reached the front line. If the fire dragon could kill them at sea and the nest of bees could block them on the plains, the warrior was becoming obsolete. But there was one final problem. What if the enemy hid behind walls of their own? What if they took cover in the very mountains that protected the borders? To solve this, the engineers turned to their most portable kill system yet, a ghost of iron that could go where no horse could follow. As the sun began to set on the era of the archer, a new sound began to echo through the mountain passes of the Ming frontier. It wasn't the rhythmic thrum of the nest of bees or the high-pitched scream of the fire dragon. It was a deep, guttural roar that shook the very earth. This was the crouching tiger cannon. In the Western world, the development of the cannon was an exercise in massive scale. European engineers were building monsters, huge bronze tubes that required dozens of horses to move and a week of preparation to fire. They were weapons of the sledgehammer variety, designed for slow, methodical sieges. But the Chinese engineers of the 14th century were thinking in terms of secret logistics. The crouching tiger was a short, thick cast iron tube, rarely more than 2 feet long. Its defining feature was the series of heavy iron rings and thick ropes wrapped around its barrel. These weren't decorative, they were a 14th century version of reinforced engineering. They allowed the cannon to withstand immense internal pressure without the need for the massive weight of a standard artillery piece. But the true genius was its portability. The crouching tiger was designed to be carried by just 2 men and positioned on a lightweight wooden frame. This was the birth of guerrilla artillery. While an enemy army might feel safe behind a ridge, believing no heavy weapon could possibly follow them into the high peaks, the Chinese operators were already in position. They could hide these tigers in high mountain passes, behind dense foliage, or even on small river boats. The kill here was the element of the untraceable strike. When the crouching tiger fired, it didn't just launch a single ball. It was often loaded with scatter shot, hundreds of small iron pellets and jagged pieces of lead. At close range, it functioned like a massive stationary shotgun. It didn't just hit a target, it deleted a coordinate. It turned the very terrain of the borderlands into a lethal trap. The crouching tiger proved that in the Battle Codex, mobility is a weapon more powerful than size. It was a ghost of iron that could appear anywhere, strike with absolute lethality, and vanish before the smoke cleared. The Chinese engineers understood that the supreme machine is not just about metal and fire, it is about the biology of the enemy. In many of their secret weapons, the kill was enhanced by chemical warfare. Gunpowder was often mixed with toxic substances, arsenic, cinnabar, and even ground-up poisonous plants. When a fire dragon or a crouching tiger detonated, it didn't just create shrapnel, it created a toxic cloud. This was the invisible kill. Even if a soldier survived the blast, the smoke would burn his lungs and blind his eyes. It was a system of systematic eradication that targeted the enemy's senses. It forced the opposition into a state of total sensory overload. Between the roar of the tiger, the scream of the dragon, and the stinging poisonous fog, the enemy's will to fight was broken long before their bodies were. This was the psychological shock of the Ming Dynasty's arsenal. They had realized that the most dangerous weapon is the one that makes the enemy feel that the very air they breathe has turned against them. By the mid-15th century, China possessed an arsenal that was technically 500 years ahead of the rest of the planet. They had rockets, machine guns, portable artillery, and chemical weapons. They had moved humanity from the age of the warrior to the age of the operator, and then the machines went silent. This is the great mystery of the Battle Codex. Why did the Supreme Machine fail to conquer the world? The answer lies in the philosophy of the Great Firewall. Unlike later European empires, which used technology as a tool for total conquest and expansion, The Ming dynasty often viewed these weapons as tools for strategic stability. They were the block that protected the Middle Kingdom. They were used to enforce the borders and maintain the status quo. The imperial court began to fear the very power they had created. They realized that if a common foot soldier with a nest of bees could delete a whole unit of elite cavalry, then the social order itself was at risk. The technology was too disruptive. It threatened the invisible wall of the emperor's authority. As a result, the engineering of these weapons was often classified. The blueprints were kept in restricted archives. The production was limited to elite, state-controlled workshops. They became classified secrets known only to a few mathematicians of death within the palace walls. While the West was beginning to industrialize the kill, China was attempting to contain it. They were building a firewall around their own genius, choosing internal stability over external dominion. To solve the problem of the stationary target, the Ming engineers looked beyond the tiger and the dragon. They sought a weapon that could loiter, a weapon that could provide the invisible kill from a position of absolute safety. This led to the creation of the Shenhuofei, the divine crow with flying fire. If the fire dragon was the cruise missile, the divine crow was the world's first aerodynamic bomber. Constructed of lightweight bamboo and high-quality paper, it was shaped like a bird to exploit the natural lift of the wind. Inside its body was a massive payload of specialized gunpowder mixed with incendiary chemicals. The secret of the crow was its stability. Unlike a standard rocket that relies on raw thrust to bludgeon through the air, the divine crow used its wings to glide. It was launched from high battlements or cliffside positions, designed to soar over the heads of an besieging army and land directly in their supply depots or hay stores. This was the birth of air superiority. For the first time, a commander could strike the heart of an enemy's logistics without ever engaging their front line. The Divine Crow proved that the Supreme Machine wasn't just about the strength of the explosion, it was about the intelligence of the delivery. It turned the very air into a conveyor belt for destruction, a system that moved the kill into a three-dimensional space where the enemy had no block. The mechanical superiority of these systems relied on a level of industrial standardization that the world would not see again until the 19th century. In the imperial workshops of Nanjing and Beijing, thousands of artisans worked in a system of compartmentalized production. This was not the craftsmanship of a lone smith. It was the birth of the military-industrial complex. Every bamboo tube for a nest of bees had to be a specific diameter. Every batch of fire medicine had to be tested for its nitrate purity to ensure the trajectory was predictable. If a rocket behaved differently every time it was lit, it wasn't a supreme machine, it was a liability. The engineers created standardized templates for their iron castings and chemical recipes that were recorded in massive encyclopedias like the Wujing Zongyao. This ensured that a crouching tiger cannon cast in the south would fire with the exact same ballistic profile as one cast on the northern frontier. This transition from the soldier as a hero to the soldier as a technician is the true secret of this era. The weapon was no longer an extension of the man's muscle. The man was now a servant to the chemical and mechanical precision of the machine. The operator's job was to maintain the system, to protect the invisible wall of logistics that allowed the fire to flow. However, the supreme machine of the Ming dynasty began to strain under the weight of its own brilliance. As the weapons became more advanced, they became more disconnected from the gritty reality of the border wars. Every divine crow required specialized paper and high-grade saltpeter that was becoming harder to secure as the empire's economy fluctuated. Every fire dragon consumed enough high-quality lacquer and silk to clothe a village. This created a logistical paradox. As the weapons became more supreme, they became more fragile. The engineers were obsessed with the how, the beauty of the multi-stage launch, the geometry of the hexagon, and they began to lose sight of the why. They were building monuments to their own technical genius, creating weapons that were so complex they required an entire infrastructure of scholars and chemists just to remain operational. When the block of the Great Wall was eventually breached by the Manchu Qing, It wasn't because the secret weapons had failed in their math, it was because the system of the operator had become too heavy to move. The machines were brilliant, but the Empire was exhausted. The history of the Supreme Machine is not a linear path of progress. It is a cycle of echoes. We often look at modern warfare, at hypersonic missiles, at saturation strikes, at area denial zones, and believe we are witnessing something brand new, something birthed entirely from the silicon and steel of the 21st century. But the blueprints were written in the 14th century, in the Fire Dragon and the Nest of Bees. Today, the concept of A2/AD, anti-access/area denial, defines the strategic landscape of the Pacific. It is a modern invisible wall designed to prevent an enemy from even entering a theater of war. When you see a modern carrier killer missile, you are seeing the direct terrifying descendant of the Huolongchu Shui. The mission is exactly the same. Bypass the enemy's defenses by using distance and multi-stage propulsion to strike before the target can even react. The weapon is no longer an extension of a soldier's bravery. It is a system of mathematical inevitability. The fire medicine that began in a Tang Dynasty lab eventually traveled along the Silk Road, fueling the very empires that would one day return to China's shores with superior steel. But the spirit of the secret weapon never truly left its birthplace. It remained embedded in the strategic DNA, the idea that the ultimate victory is not won by a better soldier but by a more efficient system. In this philosophy, the battlefield is not a place for heroism but a problem to be solved through engineering. The tragedy of these secret weapons is that they often prioritize the math over the humanity. They are brilliant in their engineering but catastrophic in their logic. They were built for a war of the future, a war where the operator sits in a room and watches a gauge, while the kill happens hundreds of miles away. They move humanity into a world where the speed of the machine is the only speed that matters. These weapons did not just change how we fight, they changed how we perceive the world. They taught us that the sky is not a barrier and the ocean is not a shield. They taught us that the invisible wall can always be breached by enough pressure, enough chemistry, and enough technical genius. We have moved from the age of the warrior, where combat was personal and visceral, to the age of the technician, where combat is an intersection of a sensor and a target. As the Battle Codex concludes this chapter, we realize that the Supreme Machine is never truly finished. It just changes its skin. From the wooden dragon to the titanium missile, from the nest of bees to the autonomous drone swarm, the goal remains the same: to achieve total destruction through technical transcendence. The era of the ancient dragon is long gone, but the age of the machine is just getting started. The silence of the laboratory is always eventually broken by the roar of the launch. As the smoke clears from the Ming Dynasty workshops and the modern launch pads alike, we are left with the same question the alchemists faced 1,000 years ago. Once you have mastered the fire medicine, how do you keep the world from burning? The secret weapons of China did not just change history, they provided the blueprint for the modern world. They taught us that the ultimate weapon isn't a sword or a shield, but the systematic application of technical genius to the problem of destruction. The vault is closed for now. If you want us to decode the secret logistics of another empire's supreme machines, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the Battle Codex.